Some losses change a man so deeply he forgets what it means to live. For 3 winters, Jonas Hale has kept himself alone in the Montana mountains, lighting 1 candle every Christmas Eve for the wife he couldn't save. The townspeople leave him be. They understand grief. But when schoolteacher Clara Whitmore gets caught in a blizzard on Christmas Eve, she follows that lone candle through the snow to his cabin door. Jonas wants to turn her away. Clara has nowhere else to go. 2 people who thought they'd spend Christmas alone. One snowbound night that will change everything. What happens when a grieving man meets a woman who refuses to let him fade into the cold? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning of Christmas Eve, 1887, arrived cold and clear over Timber Ridge, Montana Territory. Clara Whitmore stood at the frosted window of her boarding house room, watching the town wake beneath a sky the color of old pewter. Smoke curled from chimneys, horses stamped in the livery stable. Somewhere down Main Street, a dog barked twice and fell silent. She pressed her palm against the glass, felt the bite of winter through the pane, and thought about how a person could be surrounded by people and still feel entirely alone. She was 28 years old, unmarried, and 1,200 miles from the only home she'd ever known. Not that Philadelphia had truly been home. Not after her parents died of typhoid when she was 16, leaving her to the mercy of the Protestant orphan asylum on Cherry Street. She'd spent her remaining childhood years in that grey stone building, where children slept 3 to a bed and ate watered-down porridge twice a day. The matrons had been efficient rather than cruel, but efficiency offers little warmth to a grieving girl who wakes each morning reaching for a mother who will never answer. Teaching had saved her. A visiting school board member had noticed her helping younger children with their letters and arranged for her education at the normal school. By 22, Clara had her certificate and a position in a Philadelphia grammar school. She'd been good at it, patient, creative, attuned to the invisible wounds children carry. But the city held too many ghosts. Every street corner whispered memories of her parents. Every Christmas reminded her of what she'd lost. So when the advertisement appeared in the Philadelphia Inquirer, teacher wanted, Timber Ridge, Montana Territory. Room and board provided, Clara had responded within the hour. 3 months later, she'd stepped off the stagecoach into a world of endless sky and pine-covered mountains, carrying everything she owned in 2 worn carpet bags. That had been August. Now it was Christmas Eve, and Clara understood she'd simply traded one kind of loneliness for another. A knock at her door pulled her from the window. Miss Whitmore. Breakfast is ready. Mrs. Henley, the boarding house proprietor, was a stout woman with kind eyes and flour perpetually dusting her apron. She'd taken an almost maternal interest in Clara, which was both comforting and painful. "Thank you, Mrs. Henley. I'll be right down." The boarding house dining room smelled of coffee and fresh biscuits. 3 other boarders sat at the long table, Mr. Patterson, a surveyor, the widow Crenshaw, and young Billy Tucker, who worked at the sawmill. They nodded greetings as Clara took her seat. "Big plans for Christmas, Miss Whitmore?" Mr. Patterson asked, spooning gravy over his biscuits. Clara smiled, the expression she'd perfected over years of hiding loneliness. "I thought I might visit some of the families in the valley. Bring small gifts to my students." Mrs. Henley set a plate before her, concern creasing her broad face. "You be careful, dear. Weather's been unpredictable. Sky looks heavy to the north. I'll be fine. I've borrowed Mr. Polk's mare. She knows the valley trails." The widow Crenshaw sniffed. "Seems a lonely way to spend Christmas, traipsing about in the cold." "The children would be disappointed if I didn't visit," Clara said quietly. It was true, but not the whole truth. The whole truth was that staying alone in her room seemed unbearable, and at least visiting families would surround her with the warmth of others' happiness, even if she couldn't quite touch it herself. After breakfast, Clara bundled herself in her wool coat, wrapped her scarf twice around her neck, and tucked small packages into her saddlebag, peppermint sticks for the children, a jar of preserves for each family. She'd made the preserves herself from wild berries she'd gathered in September, back when Montana still seemed like an adventure rather than an exile. Mr. Polk's general store stood on the corner of Main and First. The old man was sweeping his porch when Clara arrived. "Morning, Miss Whitmore. Daisy's all ready for you." He gestured to the gentle bay mare tied to his hitching post. "You sure about heading out today? That sky don't look friendly. I'll be careful." "I'm only going as far as the Johansson place and maybe the Hendersons. I'll be back before dark." Mr. Polk's weathered face creased with doubt, but he nodded. "You're a determined young lady. That's a fine quality, long as it don't turn to stubbornness. You see the weather turning, you come straight back here? I promise." As Clara led Daisy down Main Street, she passed Sheriff Tom Brennan standing outside his office. He touched his hat brim. "Miss Whitmore, Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas, Sheriff. Heading out to the valley?" "Just for a few hours." He frowned at the northern sky. "Storm's coming." You can feel it in the air. Everyone seemed determined to warn her. Clara understood their concern. She was still an outsider here, despite 4 months of teaching their children. The West had rules about survival that city dwellers like her didn't instinctively understand. But she checked the trail map, packed warm clothes, and the valley families weren't that far. Besides, doing nothing on Christmas Eve except sitting alone in her room seemed worse than any weather. "I'll be careful, Sheriff." "Thank you." As she rode out of town, Clara let herself look toward the mountains rising to the north and east. Somewhere up there, 12 miles into the high country, Jonas Hale lived alone in his cabin. The townspeople spoke of him in hushed tones, the man who'd lost his wife 3 winters ago and hadn't been seen in town since. Some said he'd gone mad with grief. Others claimed he'd simply chosen solitude over a world that had taken everything from him. Clara had heard the stories from Mrs. Henley, usually whispered over coffee. Jonas Hale had been a good man once, active in the community, helped build the church, crafted beautiful furniture that people still treasured. Then his young wife Anna had died in childbirth, the baby with her, and Jonas had carried them both down the mountain on the coldest day of the year to bury them in the churchyard. He'd spoken to no one at the funeral, and after the last shovel of dirt was patted down, he'd walked back up the mountain and never come down again. "He lights a candle every Christmas Eve," Mrs. Henley had said. "You can see it from town if you know where to look. Just one little light burning in his window all night long. Breaking my heart, it is." Clara had looked for it last Christmas, her first in Montana. She'd stood in the cold darkness outside the boarding house, scanning the distant mountains, and finally spotted it. A tiny pinprick of light, alone in all that darkness. She'd stood there for a long time, watching that solitary flame, and felt a kinship with a man she'd never met. They were both keeping vigil for people who would never return. Now, as she guided Daisy onto the valley trail, Clara pushed thoughts of Jonas Hale aside. She had her own loneliness to manage. She couldn't solve anyone else's. The Johansson farm appeared after an hour's ride. Erik and Ingrid Johansson had 5 children, ranging from 4 to 12, and all of them tumbled out of the house when they spotted Clara approaching. Their joy at seeing her, their excitement over the peppermint sticks, their mother's insistence that Clara come inside for coffee and fresh bread, all of it warmed something in her chest that had been cold for too long. But by the time she left the Johansson place, the sky had darkened considerably. The wind had picked up, carrying the smell of snow. Clara looked north toward the Henderson farm, then back toward town. She should turn back. She knew she should. Instead, she urged Daisy forward. The Hendersons had 3 children, including little Sarah, who struggled with reading but drew the most beautiful pictures Clara had ever seen. Sarah would be heartbroken if Clara didn't visit. The first snowflakes began to fall as Clara reached the midpoint between the Johansson and Henderson farms. Within minutes, the gentle flurries had become a driving snow that stung her face and blurred the trail ahead. Daisy whinnied nervously, tossing her head. "Easy, girl," Clara murmured, but her own heart was beginning to pound. She'd made a terrible mistake. She should have listened to everyone's warnings, should have turned back at the Johansson farm. should have stayed in town altogether. The wind howled through the pines, and Clara could no longer see more than a few feet ahead. She gave Daisy her head, trusting the mare's instincts more than her own rapidly fading sense of direction. They pushed forward through the deepening snow, and Clara began to pray, not for rescue, but simply for shelter, for any place to wait out the storm. She almost missed it. Through the white chaos of wind and snow, a shape darker than the rest, something that might have been a tree stump or a rock. But then Daisy stumbled, nearly throwing Clara from the saddle, and when Clara looked down to see what had caused it, she saw something half buried in the snow at the horse's feet, a compass. Brass old, the glass face cracked but still intact. Clara's numb fingers closed around it, and even through her gloves she could feel that it was well made, precious to someone. She held it up, trying to read it in the failing light, and the needle swung north and slightly east. That direction felt wrong for town. But something, instinct, desperation, or perhaps simple chance, made Clara follow it anyway. She tucked the compass into her coat pocket and urged Daisy in the direction it indicated. 10 minutes later, through a brief gap in the storm, she saw it. A light, warm and steady, glowing through the white curtain of snow like a beacon. A single candle burning in a window. Clara's heart lurched. She knew, even before she could see the cabin itself, whose light she was following. Jonas Hale's vigil candle, lit for the wife who would never see it. And now it would save the life of a stranger who had no right to intrude on his grief. But survival trumped propriety. Clara pointed Daisy toward the light and prayed that a man who'd chosen solitude would have enough mercy left to let her in from the storm. The cabin materialized from the storm like something from a fever dream, rough-hewn, logs dark with age and weather, a peaked roof heavy with snow, and that single window glowing with impossible warmth. Clara slid from Daisy's back, her legs nearly buckling when they hit the ground. She'd lost feeling in her toes an hour ago. Her fingers were clumsy, barely able to grip the reins, as she led the exhausted mare toward what looked like a small, lean-to stable attached to the cabin's side. The wind screamed through the pines, driving snow into Clara's face hard enough to sting. She fumbled with the stable door, finally wrenching it open. Inside, a large buckskin horse watched her with calm eyes, undisturbed by the storm. Clara led Daisy in beside him, grateful when the mare immediately dropped her head to the hay scattered on the ground. "I'm sorry, girl," Clara whispered, pulling off the saddle with trembling hands. "I got us into this." She left the tack hanging on a post and staggered back out into the storm. The few feet between the stable and the cabin's front door seemed impossibly far. Her body wanted to surrender, to simply lie down in the soft snow and sleep. But Clara had seen what happened to people who gave in to that urge. She'd read about it in the Montana newspapers. Travelers found frozen in the spring thaw, curled up as peaceful as sleeping children. She reached the door and pounded on it with numb fists. The wind stole the sound away. She pounded again, harder, desperation giving her strength. Nothing. Maybe he wasn't home. Maybe he'd gone somewhere, left the candle burning, and she'd followed a false hope through the storm. Clara's vision blurred. She couldn't tell if it was tears or snow freezing on her lashes. She tried the door handle. It turned. Clara pushed inside and immediately stumbled, her frozen legs refusing to hold her. She caught herself on the doorframe, hanging there while the warmth of the cabin enveloped her like a physical embrace. The door swung shut behind her. Whether from her weight or the wind, she couldn't tell. What in God's name? The voice came from her left, deep and roughened by disuse. Clara turned her head and saw him for the first time. Jonas Hale stood beside a stone fireplace, a piece of wood frozen halfway to the flames in his hand. He was tall, perhaps 40, with dark hair shot through with grey, and a beard that hadn't seen a barber in years. His eyes, shadowed beneath heavy brows, held the startled wariness of a wolf encountering a human on a remote trail. "I'm sorry," Clara managed through chattering teeth. "The storm, I couldn't see. I followed your light." She tried to straighten, to explain properly, but her legs gave out entirely. She collapsed onto the rough wooden floor, the room spinning around her. Jonas crossed the space in 3 long strides. Strong hands gripped her shoulders, and Clara found herself looking up into a face carved by grief and weather, into something almost elemental. His eyes, she noticed through her daze, were grey, the same color as the Montana sky before snow. "Can you stand?" Clara tried. Failed. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Jonas muttered something under his breath. It might have been a curse or a prayer, and then he was lifting her, carrying her toward the fireplace as easily as if she weighed nothing. He set her down in a wooden chair close to the flames, then immediately stepped back, putting distance between them. "You need to get out of those wet clothes. You'll catch your death." His voice was clipped, uncomfortable. "There's a room through that door. You'll find dry things in the trunk. Go, change. I'll make coffee." Clara nodded, tried to stand again. This time, she made it to her feet, though she had to grip the chair back for support. She shuffled toward the door he'd indicated, each step a small victory. Behind her, she heard Jonas moving around the main room, the sounds of a man uncomfortable with company but unable to turn someone away from his threshold. The room beyond the door was small and clearly unused. A narrow bed stood against one wall, its quilt stretched so tight you could bounce a coin off it. A simple trunk sat at the bed's foot. Clara opened it with shaking hands and found women's clothes inside, a wool dress, flannel nightgowns, heavy stockings. They smelled faintly of lavender and something else. Something sad. These had been his wife's clothes. Anna's clothes. Clara hesitated, feeling like an intruder on sacred ground. But Jonas had told her to use them, and she was soaked through to the skin. She peeled off her wet dress, her fingers so stiff she could barely work the buttons. The dry clothes felt like mercy against her frozen skin. When she emerged, Jonas stood at the stove, his back to her, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. The cabin was a single large room, with the stone fireplace dominating one wall, a simple kitchen area along another, and the door to the bedroom she'd just left. Everything was spare, functional, almost aggressively plain. No decorations, no softness. The only exception was the candle burning in the window, a thick pillar of beeswax that must have been burning for hours. Jonas turned, coffee cups in hand, and stopped when he saw her. Something flickered across his face, pain so raw it made Clara's breath catch. Then his expression shuttered, went blank as fresh snow. Sit by the fire. It wasn't an invitation. It was an order. Clara sat. Jonas handed her one of the cups and retreated to the far side of the room, as if proximity to her caused him physical discomfort. He stood there, his own cup cradled in large hands, and studied her with those storm-grey eyes. "Who are you?" "Clara Whitmore. I'm the school teacher in Timber Ridge. I was visiting families in the valley when the storm hit. I got turned around, and then my horse stumbled, and I found—" She reached into the pocket of Anna's dress and pulled out the compass. "I found this. It pointed me toward your light." Jonas's eyes fixed on the compass. He set down his coffee and crossed the room, took the compass from her hand. His fingers brushed hers, briefly, accidentally, and Clara felt the warmth of living flesh against her own still cold skin. "This was Anna's," he said quietly. "I gave it to her on our wedding day. She used to wear it on a chain around her neck. Must have lost it last time." He stopped abruptly, shook his head. "Doesn't matter." He slipped the compass into his pocket and returned to his position across the room, as far from Clara as the cabin's dimensions allowed. "You can't go back tonight. Storm's too bad. You'll stay here until it passes, then you'll leave." It wasn't a discussion. Clara nodded, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "Thank you. I know you didn't want company." "No," Jonas interrupted, his voice flat. "I didn't, but I'm not going to send you back out there to die. You'll sleep in Anna's room. I'll be out here. Come first light. When the storm breaks, you head back to town and don't come back. Are we clear?" "Yes, I'm sorry to intrude. Stop apologizing." He turned away, stared into the fire. "What's done is done." Silence settled over the cabin like another layer of snow. Clara sipped her coffee, strong, bitter, exactly what she needed, and watched Jonas Hale's rigid back. He stood as still as the mountains outside and just as unyielding. This was a man who'd built walls around himself, stone by careful stone, and her arrival had breached them against his will. The candle continued to burn in the window, its flame steady despite the wind that rattled the shutters and moaned in the chimney. Clara wondered if Jonas even realized what that candle meant to people in town, that beacon of grief burning faithfully through every Christmas Eve. Or maybe he did know and didn't care. Maybe the candle wasn't for anyone else at all. Maybe it was just a promise he kept to himself, a way of saying he hadn't forgotten, would never forget. "I'm sorry about your wife," Clara said quietly. Jonas's shoulders tensed. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't respond. Then 3 years ago, Christmas Eve, the same night he lit the candle every year. Oh. Clara's throat tightened with understanding. "I'm so sorry you said that already. I mean it." Jonas turned to look at her, and in his eyes Clara saw something she recognized. The hollow ache of loss that never quite heals, that you simply learn to carry. She knew that weight. She'd been carrying it since she was 16 years old. "Why were you out in that storm alone?" he asked. "Christmas Eve, don't you have family?" "Friends? No family. And I'm still too new in town to have real friends. I thought—" She paused, unsure how much truth to offer this stranger. But something about his directness, his lack of pretense, made her honest. "I thought visiting my students' families would be better than sitting alone in my room." Jonas studied her for another long moment. Then he nodded once, a gesture that might have meant understanding or simply acknowledgement. He turned back to the fire. "Coffee's on the stove. Help yourself when you want more. There's bread and cheese in the larder if you're hungry. I'm going to check on the horses." He pulled on a heavy coat and disappeared out the door into the storm, leaving Clara alone in his cabin with the fire's warmth and the candle's steady glow. She thought about what Mrs. Henley had said, that Jonas Hale hadn't spoken to anyone from town in 3 years. And yet here he was, offering her shelter, dry clothes, coffee. Maybe the man everyone thought had gone mad with grief was simply a man who'd lost everything and was doing his best to survive. Clara understood that better than most. When Jonas returned, snow-covered and silent, he moved through the cabin like a ghost in his own home. He added wood to the fire, checked the coffee, stood at the window staring out at the darkness. Clara watched him, this man whose loneliness matched her own, and wondered if the storm had brought her here by chance or design. Either way, she wouldn't waste it. Jonas Hale might want to be alone, but tonight, Christmas Eve of all nights, he didn't have to be, and neither did she. Sleep wouldn't come. Clara lay in the darkness of Anna's room, listening to the storm rage outside and the house settle around her. The bed was comfortable enough, the quilts warm, but her mind kept circling back to Jonas, to the raw pain in his voice when he'd spoken of losing everything, to the way he'd stood at that mantel like a man barely holding himself together. She understood that stance. She'd stood the same way countless times in the years after her parents died, hands braced against whatever surface was nearest, fighting to keep upright when everything inside her wanted to collapse. The small clock on the bedside table showed midnight. Christmas Day, technically, though it felt nothing like any Christmas Clara had ever known. Those early years in Philadelphia, before the typhoid, Christmas had meant her mother's spice cake cooling on the windowsill, her father reading from Dickens by the fire, the three of them singing carols slightly off-key, but full-hearted. After they died, Christmas became just another day to survive in the orphanage, marked only by a slightly better meal and a visiting minister's well-meaning but hollow sermon about joy. This Christmas, stranded in a grieving widower's cabin while a blizzard tried to tear the world apart outside, this felt oddly more honest than all the Christmases she'd endured since losing her parents. At least here, the loneliness was acknowledged. At least here, no one pretended to feel joy they didn't possess. Clara rose, wrapping one of Anna's shawls around her shoulders. The floor was cold beneath her bare feet as she padded to the door and eased it open. The main room lay in shadow, lit only by the dying fire and that ever-burning candle in the window. Jonas's bedroll lay empty near the hearth. She found him standing at the window, silhouetted against the pale glow of the candle, staring out at the darkness and blowing snow. He didn't turn when she entered, but his shoulders tensed slightly, aware of her presence, even if he chose not to acknowledge it. Clara moved quietly into the room, not wanting to intrude, but unable to return to that lonely bed. Her eyes adjusted to the dimness, and she saw what she hadn't noticed earlier. A rocking chair positioned near the window, just far enough back that the candlelight wouldn't touch it. The chair was beautiful despite its simplicity, clearly handcrafted with care. Every curve of the wood spoke of patience and skill. Without thinking, Clara sat in it. The chair rocked gently beneath her weight, smooth and perfectly balanced. She let herself move with its rhythm, watching the snow swirl beyond the window, and began to hum. Not consciously, just a melody that rose unbidden from somewhere deep in her memory. Silent Night. Her mother used to sing it while decorating their small Christmas tree. That was her chair. Jonas's voice cut through the humming. Clara stopped mid-note, her hand flying to her mouth. "I'm so sorry." She started to rise. No. Jonas turned to face her, and in the candlelight his expression was unreadable. "Stay, please." Clara settled back into the chair, her heart beating faster than it should. Jonas continued to stare at her, and she realized what he was seeing, a woman in his dead wife's dress, sitting in his dead wife's chair, humming his dead wife's favorite carol. She'd stumbled into the most intimate corners of his grief without meaning to. "I'll stop humming." "Don't." Jonas's voice was rough. "Anna used to sit there every evening. She'd rock and hum that song, especially after—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "Especially when she was expecting the baby." Said it calmed them both. Clara's throat tightened. She could picture it so clearly, a young woman heavy with child, rocking in this chair, humming to the life growing inside her. And life that had never drawn breath outside the womb. "Why do you hum it?" Jonas asked. "If you don't mind my asking." "It helps with the loneliness," Clara said simply. "When you hum, you're making sound, filling the silence. You're reminding yourself you're still alive, still capable of creating something, even if it's just a melody." Jonas moved closer, pulled the other chair from the table, and sat down facing her. The candlelight caught the silver threads in his hair, the deep lines around his eyes. He looked older than 40 in that moment, weathered by grief in ways that had nothing to do with years. "Anna used to say the same thing," he said quietly. "Said singing kept the darkness away." She was wise. She was everything. Jonas leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together. "We met at a church social. I already told you that. What I didn't tell you was that I almost didn't go. Was tired from a week of hard work, figured I'd just stay home. My friend Tom, he's the sheriff now, he practically dragged me there. Said I needed to live a little, stop being so serious all the time." A sad smile touched his lips. Soon as I walked in, I saw her. She was helping set up tables, laughing at something someone said. Had this way of lighting up a room just by being in it. I stood there like a damn fool, just staring. Tom had to elbow me in the ribs to get me moving. Clara found herself smiling too, caught up in the memory, despite never having been there. "What did you say to her?" Asked if she needed help with the tables. "Real original." Jonas shook his head. "She saw right through me, smiled like she knew exactly what I was about. Said yes, she could use strong hands. We spent the whole evening working side by side, and by the time the social ended, I knew I was going to marry her." "How long before you proposed?" 3 weeks. Jonas's smile widened slightly. "Tom said I was crazy, moving too fast. But I knew. Anna knew too. We got married 2 months after we met, right there in the church I'd been building. Happiest day of my life." The smile faded. "Christmas Eve 3 years later was the worst." Clara stopped rocking. "You don't have to talk about it." "Maybe I do." Jonas's grey eyes fixed on hers. "Maybe I've been silent too long." Anna went into labor early morning. Was supposed to be another month yet, but babies come when they come. I rode for the doctor, but by the time we got back, his voice cracked. She was bleeding. Wouldn't stop bleeding. Baby wouldn't come right. Doctor did everything he could, but he stopped, pressed his palms against his eyes. Clara's own eyes burned with unshed tears. I held her while she died, Jonas continued, his voice barely audible. She knew she wasn't going to make it, made me promise I'd be okay, that I'd keep living. I promised because what else do you say to someone you love when they're dying? But I lied. I haven't been okay. Haven't really been living, just existing, going through motions. Clara leaned forward, reached out and took his hands. They were large, work-rough and warm. They trembled in her grasp. I lied too, she whispered. When my mother was dying, fevered out of her mind, she made me promise I'd be brave, that I'd make something good of my life. I promised, but I haven't been brave. I've been terrified every single day. Terrified of being alone, terrified of connecting with people, terrified of staying still, and terrified of moving forward. Jonas looked at their joined hands, then up at her face. So what are we doing? If we're both just surviving, just going through motions? I don't know, Clara admitted. But maybe surviving is enough. Maybe that's all anybody can do after they lose everything. Just keep breathing, keep moving, keep watching the sun come up. And maybe if we do it long enough, one day it'll hurt a little less. Does it? Jonas asked. Does it hurt less for you? Clara thought about it honestly. Some days, and some days it hurts just as much as the day they died. But I've learned to carry it better. The weight doesn't change, but you get stronger. Jonas nodded slowly. They sat there in silence, hands clasped, the rocking chair still and steady beneath Clara. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the mountain, but inside the cabin, something had shifted. Two people carrying unbearable weight had found, for just this moment, someone to help hold it. Thank you, Jonas said finally. For what? For not letting me be alone tonight. Even though I thought I wanted to be. Clara squeezed his hands gently. You shouldn't be alone on Christmas, Mr. Hale. Nobody should. Jonas's expression softened in a way Clara hadn't seen before. Jonas, just Jonas. Jonas, Clara repeated, and it felt like a small gift, his given name in her mouth. They sat together until the fire burned low and the candle flame guttered in its pool of wax. And when they finally retreated to their separate spaces to sleep, both of them rested easier than they had in years. The afternoon stretched long and quiet. Clara worked steadily on the quilt, her needle pulling thread through fabric in the same rhythm Anna's hands had followed years before. Each stitch felt like a small act of completion, of honoring something left undone. The wedding ring pattern slowly came together under her fingers, the interlocking circles growing more complete with each passing hour. Across the room, Jonas carved with increasing confidence. His hands remembered what his mind had tried to forget, the angle of the blade, the grain of the wood, the way to coax shape from formless material. Wood shavings accumulated at his feet like pale snow, and the piece in his hands gradually revealed itself. Clara watched him when she thought he wasn't looking. There was something almost meditative about the way he worked, his brow furrowed in concentration, his large hands moving with surprising delicacy. This was a man who'd found peace in creation, who'd built things meant to last, to be used by families for generations. And then he'd stopped, let those skilled hands go idle, because making beautiful things hurt too much when the person you'd made them for was gone. She understood that impulse. After her parents died, Clara hadn't been able to read for months, couldn't bear opening the books her father had loved, couldn't stand hearing the stories her mother had read to her as a child. It had taken years before literature became comfort again, instead of grief. "What are you making?" she asked, setting down her sewing to rest her fingers. Jonas held up the piece, turning it so she could see it from different angles. It was taking shape as something small and detailed, a building of some kind, with careful attention to windows and doors. "A schoolhouse," he said. "Thought it was fitting, given you're a teacher." Clara's breath caught. He was making something for her. Not because she'd asked, not out of obligation, but because he'd chosen to. "Jonas, that's beautiful." Not finished yet, but she could see the pleasure in his face at her reaction. "Got to add the details still. The bell tower, the front steps. Maybe carve your name into it if you don't think that's too forward. It's perfect. I'll treasure it." Jonas set the carving aside and looked at her directly. You've brought something back to me these past 2 days. Something I thought I'd lost forever. What's that? Purpose. He stood, crossed to the window, stared out at the endless white. I've been waiting to die for 3 years, Clara. Not killing myself, nothing like that. But not really living either. Just waiting. Figured death would come when it was ready, and I'd welcome it, because at least then I'd be with Anna again. Clara's heart clenched. She set aside the quilt and joined him at the window. And now I don't know. Jonas's jaw worked as he struggled with the words. Talking with you, making something again, even just having another person in this cabin, it's reminded me what it felt like to be alive. And I'm not sure if that's a gift or a curse. Why would it be a curse? Because it's easier to be dead inside than to feel this much. Jonas turned to face her, and the raw vulnerability in his expression made Clara's chest ache. When you're numb, nothing hurts. But when you start feeling again, when you start remembering what it was like to be happy, that's when you realize how much you've lost. That's when the grief comes back fresh, like it just happened yesterday. Clara understood exactly what he meant. I know, I've been half dead too. Jonas studied her face. How do you do it? How do you keep going when everyone you loved is gone? Honestly? Clara took a slow breath. Some days I don't know. Some days I wake up and I have to make a conscious choice to get out of bed, to get dressed, to face another day of being alone. But I do it because she paused, searching for the truth. Because I think my parents would be disappointed if I gave up. They loved me enough to give me 18 years of joy and security. The least I can do is honor that by living the life they wanted for me, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. Because the hurt means they mattered. Means what we had was real and precious. If I could forget them and feel no pain, I'd be erasing them from existence. The grief is proof of love. Jonas's expression crumpled. He turned away, pressed his palms against the window frame, and Clara saw his shoulders shake. She moved closer, placed a gentle hand on his back. Anna wouldn't have wanted this for you, she said quietly. A wife who loved you wouldn't want you to stop living. You didn't know her, no, but I know love. Real love wants the beloved to live fully, even after we're gone. Especially after we're gone. Clara kept her hand steady on his back, feeling the tremors of suppressed emotion. You said Anna made you promise you'd be okay, right before she died. Did she mean for you to hide up here on this mountain alone, waiting to die? Jonas shook his head, unable to speak. Then you're not honoring her memory. You're defying her last wish. He turned suddenly, and Clara found herself looking up into eyes swimming with tears. It's easier to be dead inside than to feel this much, he repeated, his voice breaking. I don't know if I'm strong enough to come back from where I've been. You don't have to be strong, Clara said. You just have to be willing. Willing to try even when it's hard, even when it hurts. Jonas stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly he reached out and took her hand. His grip was warm, solid, alive. Will you help me? He asked. I don't know how to do this alone. You're not alone. Not anymore. Not if you don't want to be. Something shifted in Jonas's expression. Resolve mixing with fear. Hope fighting against 3 years of learned despair. He squeezed her hand tighter. I want to try. God help me. I want to try. Clara smiled, tears pricking her own eyes. Then we'll try together. They stood there as the winter afternoon faded toward evening, hands clasped, two people who'd almost given up on living, finding reasons to keep going in each other's presence. Outside, the storm was weakening. Inside, something new was being born, tentative and fragile but real. Jonas returned to his carving with renewed focus, and Clara to her sewing. But every so often, their eyes would meet across the cabin, and in those glances was an acknowledgement of what was happening between them. Not love, not yet, but the foundation on which love might be built, trust, understanding, the recognition of kindred souls who'd walked through darkness and found each other on the other side. As evening fell, Jonas lit the candle in the window again, but this time, when Clara looked at it, she didn't see only grief. She saw perseverance. She saw a man who'd loved deeply and lost everything but was beginning to believe he might survive after all. And that small shift from merely surviving to believing survival was possible made all the difference in the world. The third morning arrived with crystalline clarity. Clara woke to sunlight streaming through the bedroom window. Actual sunlight, not the grey half-light of storm days. She dressed quickly and emerged to find Jonas already up, standing at the door with it propped open, looking out at a world transformed by snow. "Storm's past," he said without turning. "Trail will be clear enough to travel by afternoon." Clara's heart sank, though she knew it shouldn't. She'd come here by accident, stayed by necessity. Now the necessity was past, and she should be eager to return to town, to her students, to her normal life. But the thought of leaving this cabin, leaving Jonas, felt like tearing something that had just begun to heal. "I suppose I should prepare to leave then," she said quietly. Jonas turned to look at her, and she saw her own reluctance reflected in his face. "Suppose so." Though he stopped, seemed to reconsider his words. "Storm may have passed, but trail's still going to be tricky. Might be better to wait until tomorrow morning. Give the sun a chance to settle the snow." It was an excuse, and they both knew it. But Clara nodded gratefully. "If you think that's wise." "I do." Jonas's mouth quirked in something almost like a smile. "Besides, you haven't finished Anna's quilt yet. Seems wrong to leave it undone." Clara returned to her sewing after a simple breakfast, determined to complete as much of the quilt as possible before she had to leave. Her fingers moved quickly, pulling the wedding ring pattern together, connecting the circles that Anna had left separated. There was something deeply satisfying about the work, the repetitive rhythm of needle through fabric, the gradual emergence of the complete design. She was reaching for Anna's recipe book, where she'd tucked some spare pins, when a folded piece of paper slipped out from between the pages and fluttered to the floor. Clara bent to retrieve it, intending to tuck it back without looking. But the words written on the outside stopped her cold. "To Jonas, if I don't survive," Clara's hands began to tremble. This was private, intimate, meant for Jonas alone. She should give it to him immediately, let him discover it in privacy. But her eyes had already caught the first line, visible through the thin paper. "My dearest Jonas, if you're reading this." "Clara, you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." Jonas had noticed her frozen stance. Clara held up the letter with shaking hands. This was in Anna's recipe book. It's addressed to you." Jonas crossed the room in 3 strides. He took the letter from her, stared at the handwriting on the outside, Anna's neat script, as familiar to him as his own face, and the color drained from his skin. "I didn't know this existed," he whispered. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude." "No." Jonas sank into the nearest chair, the letter clutched in both hands. "No, you didn't intrude. I can't believe I never found this. 3 years I've been living in this cabin, and I never knew she'd written me a letter." Clara hesitated, uncertain whether to leave him alone or stay. Jonas looked up at her, his eyes already wet with unshed tears. "Stay, please. I don't think I can read this alone." Clara pulled the other chair close and sat facing him. Jonas's hands trembled as he unfolded the letter. The paper was thin, well used, the kind Anna would have torn from her recipe book to write on. He began to read aloud, his voice rough with emotion. "My dearest Jonas, if you're reading this, then I didn't survive bringing our child into the world. I'm writing this now while I still have strength because I know childbirth is dangerous, and I want you to have my words if the worst happens." Jonas's voice broke. He stopped, pressed his fist against his mouth, breathing hard. Clara reached out, placed her hand on his knee. A steady pressure, reminding him he wasn't alone. After a moment he continued, "First, know that I loved you with every piece of my soul. You made me happier than I ever thought possible. Our years together were the best gift life could have given me. I have no regrets, Jonas, none except that I won't get to grow old beside you. But here's what I need you to understand, my love. If I'm gone, you cannot let grief destroy you. I know how deeply you feel, how loyalty runs through you like iron through stone. I know you'll want to honor my memory by keeping some kind of vigil. But Jonas, the way to honor me is not to die alongside me. The way to honor me is to live. Jonas was openly weeping now, tears streaming into his beard, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Clara's own tears fell freely as he read on. "Promise me you'll live, Jonas, really live. Go back to town. See your friends. Keep making beautiful things with those talented hands. Help people who need helping. Fill your days with purpose and kindness. And Jonas, love again if you can. I want you to be happy, even if it's without me. Especially if it's without me. I know this might sound impossible right now. I know you're thinking you could never love anyone else, that it would be betraying me. But loving someone else doesn't erase what we had. Love doesn't work that way. The heart is bigger than we think, and it can hold more than one person's memory while still having room for new joy. If you meet someone who makes you laugh again, who fills the silence with warmth, who reminds you what it feels like to be happy, don't push them away out of loyalty to me. Let them in. Let yourself be happy. That's not betrayal. That's the opposite of betrayal. That's honoring the love we shared by proving that love taught you how to open your heart. I want you to return to the work you love. You're so talented, Jonas. The furniture you make is more than wood and nails. It's art. It's beauty. It's your way of pushing back against darkness and insisting that life matters. Don't let that die with me. Keep creating. Keep filling the world with beautiful things. I want you to keep friendships alive. Tom and Sarah, the Johansons, everyone in Timber Ridge who cares about you, they'll want to help. Let them. Don't isolate yourself. Humans aren't meant to be alone. We're meant to be part of communities, part of families. Find your people and hold on to them. And Jonas, this is the most important thing I need to tell you. Don't spend your life at my grave. I won't be there. I'll be in every sunset you watch from our porch. I'll be in every piece of furniture you build. I'll be in the smell of coffee in the morning and the sound of wind in the pines. I'll be in every act of kindness you show to someone who needs it. That's where I'll live, in the good things you do, in the life you continue to live fully and well. If we have a child, and the child survives when I don't, love them for both of us. Tell them about me, but don't let grief make you distant. Children need present parents, not ghosts. And if the child dies with me, Jonas, don't blame yourself. Don't blame God. Don't blame anyone. Sometimes terrible things happen for no reason at all. The only thing we can control is how we respond. Respond by living. Respond by loving. Respond by making your corner of the world a little bit better because you're in it. I'm not afraid of dying, my love. I'm only afraid of you giving up on life because I'm gone. Promise me you won't. Promise me you'll find reasons to smile again, to laugh again, to feel joy again. Promise me you'll be the man I fell in love with. Strong, kind, determined to make beauty in a hard world. Live for both of us, Jonas. Live the life I won't get to have. And know that wherever I am, whatever comes after this, I'll be cheering you on. I'll be proud of you. I'll be loving you still. Forever yours, Anna. Jonas folded the letter carefully, his hands shaking so badly he could barely manage it. Then he bent forward, elbows on his knees, and broke completely. Great heaving sobs tore from his chest. 3 years of suppressed grief, guilt and anguish pouring out all at once. Clara moved without thinking, kneeling before him, pulling his head down to her shoulder. Jonas clutched at her, his fingers digging into her back, and wept like a man whose soul was tearing itself apart and rebuilding simultaneously. Clara held him, one hand stroking his hair, murmuring wordless comfort. She felt his tears soaking through Anna's dress, felt the tremors racking his body, and simply held him through it all. This was what he'd needed for 3 years. Permission to grieve properly, permission to feel everything he'd been holding back, permission to break so he could heal. When the storm finally passed, Jonas pulled back, his face blotchy and wet, his eyes red-rimmed but somehow clearer than Clara had seen them. "I've been doing everything wrong," he said hoarsely. "Everything she asked me not to do, I did it. Isolated myself, stopped creating, stopped living. I thought I was honoring her memory, but I was spitting on her last wishes." "You were grieving," Clara said gently. "People don't grieve rationally, but she was right. About all of it." Jonas looked at the letter again, then at Clara. She knew me so well, knew exactly what I'd do, and she tried to save me from myself. And I never even knew the letter existed. You know now. Jonas nodded slowly. He stood, walked to the window and looked out at the snow-bright world. Clara watched him, saw the change happening in real time, the way his shoulders straightened slightly, the way he lifted his chin. He was making a decision. When you go back to town tomorrow, he said, still looking out the window, I'm coming with you. Clara's heart leapt. You are? Anna wanted me to return to life, to be part of the community again, to keep creating and helping people. He turned to face her. Today, I've been dead long enough. Time to start living again. Time to honor her properly, not by mourning forever, but by doing all the things she asked me to do. Jonas, and she was right about something else too. He crossed to where Clara stood, stopped directly in front of her. About letting someone in, about not pushing away happiness out of misplaced loyalty. His grey eyes held hers. You came through a storm and brought life back into this cabin, into me. That's not coincidence, Clara, that's grace. Clara's breath caught. What are you saying? I'm saying I don't want you to leave and have us go back to our separate lonely lives. I'm saying these 3 days mattered. You matter. Jonas reached out, took both her hands in his. I'm saying I want to know you better. Want to see what happens if two people who've both lost everything try to build something new together. Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks. I want that too, more than I thought possible. Jonas pulled her into an embrace, and Clara wrapped her arms around him, feeling his heart beating against her cheek. They stood there in the morning light, two broken people who'd found each other in a storm, and discovered that maybe, just maybe, they could help each other heal. Anna's letter lay on the table. The words of a dying woman who'd loved enough to set her husband free. And in that freedom, Jonas had finally found the strength to live again. The rest of that third day passed in a strange mixture of peace and anticipation. Jonas moved through the cabin with new purpose, no longer the ghost haunting his own life, but a man preparing to rejoin the world. He gathered supplies for the journey down the mountain, checked the horses, mended a piece of tack that had been sitting broken for who knew how long. Clara finished Anna's quilt. The final stitch went in just as the afternoon light began to fade, and she held it up to examine her work. The wedding ring pattern was complete now, all the circles connected in an endless chain. It was beautiful, a testament to Anna's skill and Clara's determination to honor what had been left undone. Jonas looked up from the pack he was organizing and saw her holding the quilt. He crossed the room slowly, reached out to touch the fabric. It's finished, Clara said softly. Just as Anna intended it, Jonas traced one of the interlocking rings with a calloused finger. She would have loved this. Loved that you completed it. He looked at Clara, and the gratitude in his eyes made her chest tighten. Thank you for doing what I couldn't. What will you do with it? Jonas considered. Keep it, not tucked away in a trunk, but out where I can see it. Reminder that unfinished things can be completed. That loss doesn't have to mean the end of everything. He folded the quilt carefully and placed it on the back of the rocking chair. Anna's chair, but no longer a shrine. Now it was simply a beautiful chair with a beautiful quilt, objects meant to be used and appreciated, not hidden away like grave goods. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Such a small gesture, but it meant everything. Jonas was choosing to live with his memories rather than be buried by them. I have something for you too, Jonas said. He retrieved the carving he'd been working on and held it out to Clara. The little schoolhouse was complete. Every detail was perfect. The bell tower, the front steps, the carefully carved windows. And there, along the base, her name was inscribed in elegant letters. Clara Whitmore, Jonas. It's extraordinary. Clara turned it over in her hands, marveling at the craftsmanship. I've never received a more meaningful gift. You brought me back to this, Jonas said. To creating, to caring about making beautiful things. Seemed right that the first thing I carved in 3 years should be for you. They stood close together. The small wooden schoolhouse cradled between Clara's hands, and the air between them felt charged with possibility. Jonas lifted one hand, hesitated, then gently tucked a strand of hair behind Clara's ear. The gesture was tender questioning. Is this all right? He asked quietly. I don't want to presume. It's more than all right. Jonas's hand lingered near her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. I haven't felt this way since Anna. Didn't think I'd ever feel it again. And I'm scared, Clara. Scared of dishonoring her memory, scared of hurting you, scared of losing someone again. Clara reached up, covered his hand with hers. I'm scared too. Scared of hoping for something good, scared of being disappointed, scared of being left alone again. But maybe being scared is better than being numb. Maybe fear means we're alive. Jonas smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and carved new lines in his weathered face. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just tired of being afraid to live. They stood there as the afternoon light faded to evening, neither quite ready to bridge the final distance between them, but both acknowledging that the distance was shrinking. There would be time for more, Clara thought. Time to explore what was growing between them, time to move carefully forward without rushing or forcing. For now, this was enough. The promise of something new, the tentative hope that two lonely people might build something together worth building. As darkness settled, Jonas lit the candle in the window one last time. But his movements were different now, less ritual mourning and more quiet remembrance. He stood before the candle for a moment, his lips moving in what might have been a prayer or a promise. Then he turned back to Clara with clear eyes. Tomorrow, when we ride down, people are going to talk, he said. School teacher spending 3 nights alone with the hermit of the mountain. There'll be gossip. Clara lifted her chin. Let them talk. I know what happened here, and so do you. We have nothing to be ashamed of. No, we don't. But I want you to understand what you're walking into. I've been gone from that town for 3 years. Some folks will be happy to see me. Others will think I've lost my mind, coming down from the mountain with you. And you're still new there, still building your reputation. I don't want to damage that, Jonas. Clara crossed to him, looked up into his worried face. I don't care what they think. These 3 days have meant more to me than 3 months of careful respectability in town. If people want to judge us for finding comfort in each other's company during a storm, that says more about them than it does about us. Jonas's expression softened. You're a brave woman. No, I'm just tired of living small. Tired of being so careful about what people think that I forget to actually live. Clara smiled. Besides, Mrs. Henley loves a good story. She'll be on our side, and Sheriff Brennan will arrest me for corrupting the town's schoolteacher. Tom Brennan is your friend. He'll be glad to see you alive and well. Jonas pulled Clara into an embrace, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I'm glad the storm brought you here, he murmured into her hair. Glad you refused to let me stay alone. So am I. They prepared a final meal together in the cabin. Simple fare, but it felt almost festive. Jonas found a bottle of wine he'd been saving. Said Anna had insisted on keeping good wine for special occasions. They toasted to new beginnings, to courage, to the strange paths that bring people together. After dinner, Clara sat in the rocking chair with the completed quilt draped across her lap, and Jonas settled nearby with his carving tools, making final touches to a small box he'd started that afternoon. They worked in comfortable silence, occasionally glancing up to share a smile or a comment. What will you do when you get back to town? Clara asked. Besides face down the gossips? Jonas considered. Find Tom. Explain where I've been, what I've been doing or not doing. Apologize for disappearing on everyone who cared about me. Then maybe talk to Reverend Michaels. Henna would want me to make peace with the church. And after that, Jonas set down his tools. After that, I'm going to offer my services to anyone who needs furniture built or repairs done. Going to start creating again, being useful again. Anna was right. Making beautiful things is how we push back against death, Clara nodded. I'll help if you need it. I'm not skilled with woodwork, but I can sand and finish. Can help with the business side of things. You do that? Of course. Clara paused, unsure how to name what they were to each other. Not quite courting, not merely friends. Something new and undefined. We're in this together, Jonas finished for her. Whatever this is, yes, together. As the night deepened, they prepared for sleep one last time in the cabin. Jonas banked the fire while Clara tidied the kitchen. These small domestic tasks felt natural, comfortable, like something they'd been doing for years rather than days. At the bedroom door, Clara paused. Jonas stood by the fireplace, his face half in shadow, half in firelight. Jonas. Yes, I'm not sorry the storm happened. I'm not sorry any of this happened. Jonas crossed to her, stood close enough that Clara had to tilt her head back to see his face. Neither am I. Not anymore. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to move away if she wanted. Clara didn't move away. She lifted her face to meet him, and when his lips touched hers, it was gentle and careful and full of promise. The kiss was brief, just a moment of connection, but it felt like sealing a contract. A promise that whatever came next, they would face it together. When Jonas pulled back, his eyes were soft. Sleep well, Clara. You too. Clara slipped into the bedroom, her heart racing, a smile she couldn't suppress curving her lips. She changed into Anna's nightgown one last time, slipped under the quilts, and lay staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow they would return to the world, to obligations and expectations, to gossip and judgment, to the demands of ordinary life. But they would return together, and that made all the difference. In the main room, Jonas settled into his bedroll by the fire. He could still feel the warmth of Clara's lips against his, could still smell the lavender scent of her hair. For 3 years, he'd believed himself incapable of feeling anything beyond grief. Now, in the space of 3 days, one woman had reminded him what it meant to be alive. Anna's letter lay on the table, visible in the candlelight. Jonas picked it up, read through it one more time. "Love again if you can," she'd written. "That's not betrayal. That's honoring the love we shared. I'm trying, Anna," Jonas whispered to the empty room. "I'm trying to do what you asked. Hope you're proud of me." The candle burned steady in the window. Tomorrow, Jonas would extinguish it for the last time. Not because he was forgetting Anna, but because he was finally ready to honor her wishes. To live, to create, to love again if the chance presented itself. And Clara Whitmore, with her quiet strength and her understanding heart, might just be that chance. Jonas blew out the candle, lay down in the darkness, and for the first time in 3 years, felt genuine hope for the future. Dawn broke clear and cold over the Montana mountains. Clara woke to the sound of Jonas moving about the main room, preparing for the journey. She dressed quickly in her own clothes, now dry and ready, though she folded Anna's dress carefully and left it on the bed as she'd found it. When she emerged, Jonas had coffee ready and the horses saddled. He handed her a cup and studied her face in the morning light. "Ready?" "As I'll ever be." They drank their coffee standing, neither quite ready to leave, but knowing they must. Jonas took one last look around the cabin that had been his prison and his sanctuary for 3 years. Then he shouldered his pack, picked up the supplies he'd prepared, and opened the door. The world outside sparkled under fresh snow. The sky was impossibly blue, the air so cold and clean it almost hurt to breathe. Jonas's horse, the big buckskin, stamped impatiently while Daisy stood calm and ready. Jonas helped Clara mount, his hands steady and sure, then swung up onto his own horse. For a moment, they both looked back at the cabin. The candle in the window was dark now, the glass cold. It would remain dark, Jonas had decided. "The vigil was over, shall we?" Jonas asked. Clara nodded, and together they began the long descent from the mountain. The trail was treacherous in places, snow-covered and icy, but Jonas navigated it with the confidence of a man who knew every rock and route. He kept close to Clara, watching to make sure she didn't slip, occasionally reaching out to steady her horse when the trail narrowed. They didn't talk much during the ride. The journey required concentration, and besides, there seemed little left to say. Everything important had been spoken in the cabin. Now came the test, whether what they'd found together in isolation could survive in the light of day, under the scrutiny of a watchful town. As they descended, the forest gradually changed around them. The high country pines gave way to mixed woodland, then to the open spaces of the valley. By midday, they could see Timber Ridge in the distance, a cluster of buildings huddled together against the vast Montana landscape. smoke rising from chimneys into the clear air. Jonas reined in his horse on a ridge overlooking the town. Clara pulled up beside him. "You all right?" she asked, nervous. Jonas's jaw was tight, his hands clenched on the reins. "Haven't set foot in that town in 3 years. Don't know what kind of reception I'll get. You'll get the reception of a man who's been mourned and missed. They'll be glad to see you, or they'll think I've lost my mind." "Maybe you have," Clara said with a slight smile. "Maybe we both have. But if being a little mad means we get to be happy, I'll take madness over sanity any day." Jonas looked at her, and some of the tension left his shoulders. "How did you get so brave?" "I'm not brave. I'm terrified. But I'm doing it anyway." They continued down into the valley. As they approached the outskirts of town, Clara could see people beginning to notice them. Heads turning, hands pointing, conversations stopping mid-sentence. Word would spread fast. Jonas Hale returning from his mountain exile, and the school teacher with him. They rode down Main Street, and people emerged from buildings to stare. Mrs. Henley stood on the boarding house porch, her hand pressed to her mouth. Mr. Polk stepped out of his store, eyes wide. And there, standing in front of the sheriff's office, was Tom Brennan himself, frozen in place, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. Jonas dismounted in front of the sheriff's office. His movements were stiff, uncertain, but he forced himself to meet Tom's eyes. Tom, for a long moment. The sheriff didn't move. Then his face broke into a broad grin, and he crossed the space between them in 2 strides, pulling Jonas into a bear hug that nearly lifted him off the ground. "You stubborn son of a—" Tom's voice was thick with emotion. 3 years, Jonas. 3 years without a word. "I know. I'm sorry." Tom pulled back, held Jonas at arm's length, studying him. "You look different. Better, maybe. What brought you down from that mountain?" Jonas glanced back at Clara, who dismounted and stood holding Daisy's reins. "Miss Whitmore got caught in the storm on Christmas Eve, ended up at my cabin. We talked. She reminded me what living looks like." Tom's eyebrows rose. He looked between Jonas and Clara, clearly calculating what 3 days alone on a mountain might mean. But there was no judgment in his expression, only relief and cautious joy. "Miss Whitmore," Tom tipped his hat. "I'm guessing you've got quite a story to tell." "We both do, Sheriff." Clara met his gaze steadily. "Though I expect most of the town has already decided what that story is," Tom laughed. "Oh, they're inventing stories right now. But I know Jonas and I know you. Whatever happened up there, it's your business and nobody else's." "Tom," Jonas's voice roughened. "I need to apologize. To you, to everyone, for disappearing, for abandoning people who cared about me. For days." "Stop." Tom gripped his shoulder. "You were grieving. We all understood that. And now you're back. That's what matters." Mrs. Henley had crossed the street, tears streaming down her broad face. "Jonas Hale, if you ever disappear like that again, I'll march up that mountain myself and drag you down by your ear. I swear it." Jonas found himself smiling. "Yes, ma'am." She hugged him fiercely, then turned to Clara. "And you, young lady, I want to hear everything. Every detail. How you survived that storm. What happened up there. All of it. It's a long story, Mrs. Henley. Then you'd better start talking." More people were gathering now, curious, concerned, welcoming. Mr. Polk clapped Jonas on the back. The widow Crenshaw nodded approvingly. Even some folks Jonas didn't recognize, new to town in the 3 years he'd been gone, came forward to introduce themselves. But then the crowd parted, and Reverend Michaels approached. The elderly minister moved slowly, leaning on his cane, but his eyes were sharp and kind. He stopped in front of Jonas and studied him for a long moment. "Welcome back, my son," he said quietly. "We've kept a place for you at the church, kept hoping you'd return." Jonas's throat tightened. "I'm sorry, Reverend, for missing services." For grieving?" The Reverend shook his head. "God understands grief better than anyone. The question is, are you ready to return to life?" Jonas glanced at Clara, found her watching him with steady, encouraging eyes. He thought of Anna's letter, her wishes for him, the promise he'd made to try. "Yes, sir. I believe I am. There's a Christmas service tonight," Reverend Michaels said gently. "It's late, I know, day after Christmas, but we had to postpone the service when the storm hit. Everyone was too worried about getting home safely. We're holding it tonight instead. He looked at Jonas with careful hope. I'd be honored if you'd attend. Jonas hesitated. The thought of sitting in that church, surrounded by people, singing carols and hearing about joy and hope, it seemed like too much, too fast. But then he felt Clara's hand slip into his, her fingers warm and steady. We'll be there, she said. Jonas looked at her, drew strength from her quiet confidence, and nodded. Yes, we'll be there. The Reverend's face lit up. Wonderful. Service begins at 6 o'clock. He turned to go, then paused. Jonas, Anna would be proud of you. The words hit Jonas like a physical blow, but a good one, like breaking through to air after being underwater too long. He nodded, unable to speak. As the crowd dispersed, Tom pulled Jonas aside. Listen, I know this is overwhelming. If you need somewhere to stay tonight, Sarah and I have room. You're welcome at our table. Thank you, Tom, but I think... Jonas glanced at the mountain trail they'd just descended. I think I'll head back up tonight. Need to ease into this, you understand? I do, but you'll come back down soon? Soon, I promise. No more disappearing for years at a time. Tom clasped his shoulder. Good, because this town needs you, Jonas. Always did. Clara returned to the boarding house to clean up and change, and Jonas went with Tom to the sheriff's office to catch up on 3 years of town news. But Clara's presence lingered with Jonas like warmth after standing near a fire. He found his thoughts drifting to her, even as Tom talked about marriages and births, deaths and departures, the small triumphs and tragedies of community life. By evening, Jonas had bathed, trimmed his beard, and borrowed clean clothes from Tom. He looked in the mirror and barely recognized himself. Less wild mountain man. More the person he'd been before grief had carved him into someone new. He met Clara outside the church, just as twilight deepened to full dark. She'd changed into a simple green dress that brought out the warmth in her eyes, and her hair was pinned up in a way that revealed the graceful curve of her neck. You look beautiful, Jonas said, and meant it. Clara blushed. You clean up rather well yourself. They entered the church together, and conversations hushed as people turned to watch. Jonas felt his chest tighten with anxiety, but Clara's hand in his kept him grounded. They walked down the center aisle, every eye upon them, and took a seat near the back. The pews were hand-carved oak, built by Jonas's own hands 6 years ago. He ran his palm over the wood, remembered the satisfaction of creating them, the pride Anna had shown when they were installed. Good work, meant to last, meant to serve. Reverend Michaels began the service with a prayer of thanksgiving for safety during the storm, for the blessing of community, for second chances and new beginnings. Jonas felt the words settle over him like a benediction. They sang carols. Silent night, O come all ye faithful. Joy to the world. Jonas's voice was rusty from disuse, but he sang anyway, and beside him Clara's clear soprano rose in harmony. Around them, the congregation sang too, and for the first time in 3 years, Jonas felt like he was part of something larger than his own grief. The Reverend's sermon was about light in darkness, about candles that burn through the longest nights, about hope persisting even when all seems lost. Jonas thought about his vigil candle, about Clara following its light through the storm, about how sometimes what we think is an ending is actually a beginning. When the service concluded, people began to gather in small groups, talking and laughing. Several approached Jonas, some hesitant, some bold, all welcoming. He accepted their greetings, answered questions about his well-being, promised to rejoin the community properly. Then Clara stepped forward, drawing attention. In her arms, she carried a bundled package. She looked at Jonas, seeking permission. He nodded, understanding what she intended. "Excuse me," Clara's voice cut through the conversations. "I'd like to share something, if I may." The church quieted. Reverend Michaels gestured encouragingly. "Please, Miss Whitmore." Clara carefully unwrapped the package, revealing Anna's completed quilt. Gasps rippled through the congregation. Many remembered Anna working on it, remembered her excitement about the coming child. "Some of you may recognize this," Clara said, her voice steady but emotional. "Anna Hale was making this quilt for her child. She didn't get to finish it. While I was stranded at Jonas's cabin during the storm, I asked permission to complete what Anna had started. She held the quilt up so everyone could see the intricate wedding ring pattern, the careful stitches, the beautiful completion of Anna's vision. I wanted to do this publicly, Clara continued, because I think it represents something important. Anna wanted Jonas to live fully, to continue creating beauty, to find happiness again. This quilt, finished but made with love for someone who never got to hold it, is a reminder that unfinished things can be completed with care. That loss doesn't have to mean the end of everything. That love continues even when the people we love are gone. She turned to Jonas. I'd like to give this to you, Jonas. Not to put away in a trunk, but to use. To remember Anna by celebrating life, not by hiding from it. Jonas stood, his legs unsteady, and accepted the quilt. He held it against his chest, feeling the weight of it, the love stitched into every seam, Anna's love, and now Clara's care in completing it. Thank you, he managed, his voice thick. This means... He stopped, overcome. Clara smiled at him with such understanding that Jonas felt his heart crack open a little wider. He looked out at the faces watching them, Tom and his wife Sarah, Mrs. Henley dabbing at her eyes, Mr. Polk nodding approvingly, Reverend Michaels beaming with pastoral satisfaction. Anna left me a letter, Jonas said, the words coming before he'd decided to speak them. Found it just yesterday, hidden in her recipe book. She wrote it in case she didn't survive the birth. He paused, gathering courage. She asked me to live. Not just survive, but really live. To keep creating, to rejoin this community, to, his voice caught, to love again if I could. She said that wouldn't be betraying her. It would be honoring what we had. He looked at Clara. Miss Whitmore reminded me what living looks like, what kindness and courage look like. She refused to let me stay alone in my grief on Christmas Eve, and in doing so, she gave me back my life. Mrs. Henley was openly crying now. Tom was grinning. And throughout the church, people were nodding, understanding passing between them like warmth from a shared fire. I'm back, Jonas said simply. I'm ready to be part of this community again, ready to build furniture and help my neighbors and show up for Sunday services, ready to honor Anna by doing what she asked, by living fully and well. Spontaneous applause broke out. People surged forward, not to gossip or judge, but to welcome him home. Jonas found himself embraced, congratulated, his hand shaken until it was sore. And through it all, Clara stood nearby, watching with quiet pride. 3 months later, on a morning when spring was just beginning to whisper through the Montana pines, Clara stood at the schoolhouse window, watching the children play during recess. The snow had finally receded, leaving behind mud and the first brave shoots of green. Tommy Brennan was teaching the younger children how to play marbles. Sarah Polk sat under a tree, sketching in the journal Clara had given her. The schoolhouse door opened, and Clara didn't need to turn to know who it was. She'd learned to recognize Jonas's footsteps. The particular way he moved through space, purposeful but never hurried. Afternoon. Miss Whitmore, he said, his voice warm with the private joke between them. In public they maintained propriety. In private, well, that was different, Mr. Hale. Clara turned, couldn't quite suppress her smile. What brings you by today? Jonas set down the toolbox he'd been carrying. Noticed your desk was wobbling last week. Thought I'd fix it properly before you ended up on the floor. My hero, he grinned. That expression came more easily now after 3 months of healing and reconnection. Jonas had kept his promise to rejoin the community. He'd reopened his workshop, taken on commissions, spent Sundays at church and evenings helping neighbors with repairs. The town had welcomed him back with open arms, grateful to have a skilled craftsman and a good man among them again. And he'd spent time with Clara, proper courting time, the kind that wouldn't give Mrs. Henley apoplexy, dinners at the boarding house with appropriate chaperonage, walks through town where everyone could see them, attendance at community events side by side. It was slow and careful and entirely appropriate. It was also the happiest either of them had been in years. Jonas knelt by Clara's desk, examining the wobble. Clara watched him work, noting the changes 3 months had wrought. He'd filled out slightly, no longer quite so gaunt. His eyes held light instead of shadows. He laughed readily, smiled often, engaged with the world instead of hiding from it. "How's business?" Clara asked. "Good, very good, actually. Got 3 tables on order, 2 rocking chairs, and the Hendersons want a complete bedroom set for their daughter's wedding." Jonas tested the desk, found the loose leg, began making adjustments. "More work than I can handle alone, honestly. Been thinking about taking on an apprentice." "That's wonderful." Jonas glanced up at her. "I've been thinking about other things too." "Oh?" "About the future. About what I want from it." He returned his attention to the desk, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders. "About whether I'm ready for more." Clara's heart began to beat faster. They'd been circling this conversation for weeks now, both aware of where things were heading, but cautious about rushing. "And are you ready?" Jonas set down his tools and stood, facing her directly. Through the window, Clara could see the children playing, oblivious to the moment unfolding inside. "I went up to the cabin last weekend," Jonas said. "First time since we came down at Christmas. Wanted to see it again, see how I felt. How did you feel?" "Peaceful." "It's a good place, Clara. Beautiful, quiet. Room enough for a family if a man wanted to start one. Close enough to town for daily travel if needed." He took a step closer. "Far enough away for privacy when privacy's wanted." Clara's breath caught. "Jonas, I lit 2 candles in the window while I was there. One for Anna, like always. One for you." He reached out, took both her hands. "Anna's candle was for remembering. Yours was for hoping. For believing that maybe I could build something new while honoring what I had before." "You can," Clara whispered. "You are. Then I have a question to ask you, Miss Whitmore. An important one." Jonas's grey eyes held hers, steady and sure. "But I want to ask it properly. At the right time, in the right way. So I'm giving you fair warning. Sometime soon, I'm going to ask if you'll consider sharing that cabin with me. Sharing a life with me. And I'd like to think you might say yes." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks, but she was smiling. "I'd like to think I might too." Jonas pulled her into an embrace, right there in the schoolhouse, with all the children potentially looking through the windows. Clara didn't care. She wrapped her arms around him and held tight, feeling his heart beat against hers, solid and alive and full of promise. "I love you," Jonas murmured into her hair. "Didn't think I'd ever say those words to anyone again. But I love you, Clara. Your strength, your kindness, the way you refused to let me die inside that mountain. You brought me back to life." "I love you too," Clara said against his chest. "You reminded me what home feels like. What it means to be truly seen and valued. I was so lonely before that storm, Jonas, so lost. And then I found your light in the darkness." They stood together for a long moment, 2 people who'd each thought themselves beyond healing, beyond happiness. Now proving that love could find you even in the unlikeliest places. Outside, the children's voices rose in play and laughter. Inside, 2 adults who'd survived more loss than most people face in a lifetime held each other and planned a future neither had thought possible. "When will you ask?" Clara finally said, pulling back to look up at him. "Officially, I mean," Jonas smiled. "Soon. Maybe take you up to the cabin, show you the place properly. Ask you there, where it all started. I'd like that. Spring wedding?" "Getting ahead of yourself, aren't you?" "Maybe, but when you know, you know. And I know, Clara, just like I knew with Anna. Some things are certain." Clara reached up, touched his bearded cheek. "Yes, some things are certain." Jonas kissed her then, gently, reverently, a promise of more to come. When they parted, he returned to fixing the desk while Clara composed herself, smoothing her skirts and wiping her eyes. The schoolhouse bell rang, calling the children back inside. Clara watched them file in, all rosy-cheeked and energetic, and felt a surge of contentment. This was her life now, teaching children who mattered to her, living in a community that had welcomed her, loving a man who understood loss and healing in equal measure. As the children settled into their seats, Tommy Brennan raised his hand. "Miss Whitmore, are you and Mr. Hale getting married?" Clara felt herself blush. Jonas, still working on the desk, chuckled quietly. "That's none of your business, Tommy Brennan," Sarah Polk said primly. "Though everybody in town knows they're courting." "Children," Clara said firmly, but she was smiling. "Let's focus on our lessons. We're discussing geography today, specifically the territories of the American West and how they're changing." The children groaned but complied, and Clara began her lesson. Behind her, Jonas finished his work on the desk, packed up his tools, and prepared to leave. But before he went, he caught Clara's eye and mouthed 3 words. "I love you." Clara's heart soared. She mouthed them back, then turned her attention to her students, to the lesson, to the ordinary, beautiful work of teaching young minds to think and dream and grow. That evening, Jonas returned to his workshop in town, not to the mountain cabin, not anymore. He'd found a balance, spending most of his time in Timber Ridge, where he could work and socialize and be part of the community, but visiting the cabin regularly to maintain it and remember. The cabin was no longer a prison or a shrine. It was simply a place he'd once retreated to and might someday share with someone who understood both its sorrows and its possibilities. He lit a lamp and settled at his workbench. He'd been working on something special, a small wooden box intricately carved with a wedding ring pattern to match Anna's quilt. Inside, he'd placed the ring he'd commissioned from the jeweler in Helena. Simple gold, like Anna's had been, but new. A fresh beginning. As he worked, Jonas thought about that Christmas Eve 3 months ago. About a woman lost in a storm, following a candle lit for someone else. About how the worst night of his life, the anniversary of losing everything, had become the beginning of healing. Sometimes, he thought, grace comes in unexpected forms. Sometimes the light you put out for one person guides another home. Sometimes saying goodbye to the past means saying hello to the future. And sometimes, when you think you're alone in the darkness, someone brave enough refuses to leave you there. Jonas set down his carving tools and looked out the workshop window at the town he'd rejoined. The community that had welcomed him back, the life he was rebuilding piece by careful piece. Somewhere across town, Clara was preparing her lessons for tomorrow, maybe thinking about him the way he was thinking about her. 2 candles burning instead of 1. 2 lives intertwined instead of 2 people alone. It wasn't what Jonas had planned. It wasn't the life he'd imagined with Anna. But it was good, real and honest, and full of quiet joy. And that, Jonas had finally learned, was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Spring had come to Montana, and with it the promise of new growth, new love, new reasons to face each day with gratitude instead of grief. Jonas returned to his work with a full heart, carving beauty from wood, building a future from hope, and remembering always that the greatest gift one person can give another is simply refusing to let them face the cold alone.